stay up here. Okay, let's crack on. And it's a great pleasure for me, James Fanshawe, to be chairing today. We're going to slightly shuffle the running order because the Minister's got to dash off because a whip has summoned her back to the House, and or all of the whips or somebody's whips. And it's truly an honour to have you down here on board Albion. Albion looking her finest, apart from the weather guys. Meadow Bridge, please. Let's crack straight into this, and it's a huge pleasure for me to introduce, I'm going to check, because actually she introduced herself as the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. Actually, there's a sneaky entry there. There's clean growth in the middle. This is at the heart of course, what many of us are striving towards. And although the conference is Pathways to Autonomy, the road to 2030 and beyond, I think most people that I know in this room, or on this flight deck, should I say, are already well into this journey, and some of us have been going a decade or more. So, Minister, if I may, it's a great pleasure. The floor's yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello, everyone. It's a really great pleasure to be here speaking to you all face to face after spending so long, all of you, I'm sure, like I have, on computer-enabled conferences and meetings, never seeing anything beyond your own four walls. This is a great set of four walls, and I think very good for all our mental health and well-being. It really is a fantastic venue, so thank you to everyone from Albion for making our welcome so warm as ever. I hope that everyone will be taking the opportunity to attend some of the fascinating events that are being put on as part of London International Shipping Week this week, and also perhaps to get to see some of the amazing tech being showcased down at DSEI. When I was the Minister for Defence Procurement back in 2019, I had the honour of signing the MOD up to the Women in Defence Charter. Harder than you'd think, but we got the MOD there eventually, as well as finding myself climbing into a tank for a Maggie-style photo, but I didn't have a headscarf, sadly. But they tried their best to capture it. But from new weapons to the launch of Tempest, autonomy was then really beginning to be a central feature. But I think we've made some really enormous leaps forward since then. And of course, I hardly need to remind this audience how important the maritime sector as a whole is to our UK economy. The maritime sector is one of Britain's biggest industries, supporting over £47 billion in business turnover, £17 billion in direct GVA, and over 1 million supported jobs for UK employees right back in 2017. And evidence captured in the Foresight report, The Future of the Sea, shows that the sector is continuing to grow, with the blue economy projected to double in size to $3 trillion by 2030. That Government Office for Science report identified that autonomy is likely to be the single most important maritime technological development for the growth of the sector. There's an estimated global market of $136 million for marine autonomy over the next 15 years, particularly for cost-effective data collection, for offshore marine operations, including but by no means limited to defence, oil and gas, offshore renewable energies, and of course aquaculture. And my Department of Transport colleagues have published Maritime 2050, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which sets the goal that the UK will take a world-leading position in the design, manufacture, uptake and use of maritime autonomy and other innovative shipboard technologies. So Maritime 2050 provides an important framework and roadmap, both for industry and for government, in advancing a sustainable and progressive future for the UK's maritime sector. Government is determined that the UK should be world-leading in design, in manufacture, in the uptake and use of those smart shipping technologies. The UK shipping industry will also be able to build on the recent progress across a wide range of zero-emission technologies, from battery technology developed within the UK automotive industry to its competitive advantage in hydrogen and ammonia fuel technologies to support the achievement of the government's ambitious climate change targets, whilst delivering value to the UK economy. So that's why technology and innovation are at the core of our vision for the future of the UK shipbuilding enterprise. Earlier this year, at the SMI conference, First Marine International presented findings from their shipbuilding competitiveness study. This study, part funded by BAYS for the Maritime Enterprise Working Group, clearly signals opportunities for our domestic shipbuilding sector. Critically, we know that our shipbuilding sector needs to focus on complex vessels and added value technologies like autonomy to improve productivity and competitiveness. Innovation is a key factor in addressing that competitiveness challenge, and that's why BEIS funds innovation development through Innovate UK and the Catapult Network. Many of the programmes and the innovation calls are already benefiting marine engineering, including, of course, in autonomous systems. And the decarbonisation of maritime transportation project in Belfast, delivered through the Strength in Places Fund, will build on Belfast's maritime heritage and world-leading expertise in advanced manufacturing and renewable energy. A 13-partner consortium by Artemis Technologies was awarded a £33 million grant to develop zero-emissions ferries in Belfast. And utilising Belfast's advanced manufacturing clusters, the Belfast Maritime Consortium, working with the local supply chain, will produce the world's first autonomously controlled, fully submerged electric hydrofoiling vessel and develop the technical and operational requirements for a maritime transport system of the future. And I think this demonstrates just how the sector can benefit from our support programmes, and I look forward to more funding successes for the sector in the future. And it's not just in Belfast where we can see important industrial developments supported by government. In Plymouth and across the wider southwest region, we can see industry taking the initiative to create a holistic, industry-wide approach to addressing the technology challenges of operating autonomous platforms safely and securely. The creation of the UK Maritime Autonomy Centre by Thales at Turnchapel Wharf in Plymouth provides a waterfront business park to develop the vision to be a world-leading integration, trials, training and education centre for maritime autonomous systems. And thanks to Thales' investment and leadership, this is becoming a reality. It's initiatives like this that have helped put the region on the map. The Department of International Trade has also recognised the importance of maritime autonomy in the region. The Southwest has been selected for the 2021 launch of a high potential opportunity, an HPO as we call them, focusing specifically on maritime autonomy. And the programme selects investment opportunities to promote to foreign investors, driving investment into the UK's regions. So in government, we're working to ensure that the development of autonomous systems is coordinated across departmental interests, including defence applications. And the Royal Navy recognised that future operational advantage can be enhanced, exploiting a network of autonomous, uncrewed and crewed platforms. Cutting-edge technologies from industry and academia are being developed through operational experimentation alongside conventional Royal Navy platforms to accelerate and de-risk uncrewed autonomous vehicles, those UAVs, opportunities in the above water, underwater and air environments. Word reaches me that over the river at DSCI, the Royal Navy is also leading the way in something called PODs, Persistent Operational Deployment Systems, containerised tech systems to provide levels of agile adaptation to fast-changing environments. Again, thinking about how we move to those next generations. The Royal Navy is also investing over £1 billion over the next decade to deliver world-class autonomous mine-sweeping systems. Those demonstrator systems have outperformed existing mine counter vessel capabilities in initial trials and enable mines to be neutralised from a remote and a safe distance, of course keeping sailors safe and offering flexibility, reach and agility needed in our world of constant competition. So there is a great opportunity for the maritime sector to share its learning and expertise of automation, as well as to learn from those other modes of transport, from automotive, from rail, and from aerospace, as well as inside and outside of our factories. Consider the tidal Thames around Stratford and Greenwich, where the Royal Navy's Maritime Autonomy Surface Testbed, MAST, began testing 2 years ago. At around the same time, self-driving cars and pods were testing in Greenwich, where testing is continuing today. And on the other side of the river, the self-driving DLR is in operation in close proximity to City Airport, where those automated systems have operated in aircraft for many years. And as AI experts will readily attest, the technologies underpinning steering and navigation are increasingly applicable across several, if not all, nodes, and the UK has demonstrated great leadership in them all. The opportunity now is to explore how those opportunities join up those areas of leadership to achieve competitive advantage for the UK, creating better jobs and better journeys for our citizens. In automotive, the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles has partnered with industry to deliver more than 80 innovative projects with £250 million of government funding since 2015. And several of the more than 200 organisations involved supply at least one or other mode of transport. In autonomous underwater systems, much of the technology was first developed for the oil and gas sector and is eminently transferable. Robotic systems with drone-like technology and inbuilt AI, initially developed for surveying oil and gas pipelines on the seabed, are now being used to support seabed survey operations for cable laying and wind turbine foundation monitoring. The same technology can be used to benefit underwater defence systems or monitor the environmental conditions on the seabed for ocean science and research. Some of these systems in operation today are being controlled from mission control centres in Aberdeen, where the actual underwater vehicle could be operating over the horizon in any other part of the world. So to help the UK capitalise on this multi-billion-pound industry and the opportunities to be grasped through the adaptation of existing technologies for multi-sector use, next month we'll see the launch of the Global Underwater Hub in Aberdeen. This new, strategically focused and industry-led organisation will build on the already world-leading UK underwater sector. With funding support from government, it will help the UK to draw together technologies, skills and exports to transform the UK's underwater industry into one of the largest and fastest growing industries in the country. The UK has consistently ranked as one of the most innovative countries in the world, and it's vital that we retain this talent to innovate, our great gift of challenging existing norms, to create new technologies and to drive progress. Marine businesses and the constant push by the Royal Navy and others always seeking advantage, be that military, economic or environmental, can play an essential part in delivering net zero solutions for this vital sector and exporting these successes around the world. So I'm looking very much forward to watching these developments continue to surprise and amaze us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, although the Minister's got to shoot off to the House, she's very kindly said that she's prepared to stick around for a few minutes and answer any of your questions. I hope we've got a roving mic somewhere, but if you'd like to ask the Minister questions about what she said, or perhaps what she hasn't said, can I see any hands going up with a question from the floor, please? Oh, look, too early in the session. Any of the panellists like to ask a question? None? Well, I've got one.
Go on then, James.
Do you think the government's actually really doing enough to kickstart this whole thing? I mean, we hear a lot of fabulous talk and figures and incentives and strategies, but what's a personal view on this? What more would you like to see government doing to make sure that we actually have autonomy in the front, but more importantly, given your full title, you know, the path towards zero emissions, which is really what I think it's all about?
So I'm sure you could say government could always provide more money, but I think our absolute commitment is to underwrite and support business and that innovative thinking. And I think we have some of the world leading through Innovate UK and our catapults, centres from which business can really grow those ideas. Government isn't terribly good at new ideas. Sorry, did I say that out loud? That's not necessarily what we're good at. What we are really good at is providing a level of de-risking and support and a framework for businesses to grow. And so I think that, for me, is what we do. And I think we do that really well. We've grown our catapult network enormously in the last few years. And I think within this sector and, you know, to my own portfolio, that wider challenge of how we tackle the environmental and decarbonisation challenges that face us all, I would hope, and I would be happy for anyone to challenge me, if those resources that are there to provide those first principle support systems, underwriting, and then the ability, therefore, to bid into government funds as they appear in any number of sectors, and we, you know, a number from industrial decarbonisation through to all sorts of environmental ones and indeed military, that we are then able to really draw those together. But I think we have made a huge increase through, and actually a lot of it through BASE, but as MOD as well, to drive the intelligent and creative thinking that others than government have and to try and make sure that we capture them, both because they're great ideas and they should be brought to fruition, but also because we want them to have the UK stamp on them. We want to take them around the world.
Well, there are certainly some people in the marquee here who've seen the benefit quite recently of the Innovate stuff. Does anybody want to challenge the Minister? Yes.
Oh, now hands go up.
Now
Go
the
on.
hand's going up. Okay, can we get a microphone, please? Could you introduce yourself by name and who you are and where you go?
Yes, Alan Cartwright. I'm involved in the survey and certification of a whole range of small ships, and about a third of my workload is with autonomous vessels because of where I work in the Solent area. Now, all the support that you can give in those ways through government is wonderful, but there's another aspect to it, and that is regulation. The lead that has occurred in this country, a worldwide lead, some of our colleagues overseas may argue, has been driven by industry, by innovation, by really, really creative thinkers, then pulling up their socks and doing things. And we've got to make sure that the regulation, as autonomy comes into regulation, and I know colleagues in the MCA are working on this at the moment, is appropriate and does not strangle the lead that we've got in the UK. Would you and would perhaps the shipping minister agree with that? And can we do something to make sure that our technological lead is facilitated rather than strangled? Thank you.
And I think that's an absolutely critical question, and you're quite right to ask it. It was something that I was discussing with the Secretary of State last night, actually, which was how do we rocket boost, industrial activity, Enterprise UK in the broadest sense. And clearly one of those is making sure that the regulation is at the level it needs to be, and it's there to provide the safety requirements we need, but otherwise that it allows business to grow. And I think we're of the view that it's something you have to continually watch over because it will continue to grow. There are organisations designed to help protect and so on, and it's something that we're very focused on. But I can't speak for the shipping minister, but I know he is like-minded in that sense of continuous review. And I would say always, please, any of you who are at the front end of all innovation and business lead, always tell us if you're tripping over things that simply cause negative outcomes, because that is never what we want to do, unless clearly you want to do something that's going to cause irreparable harm. Then we will probably tell you not to. I think that's the key. But it's a constant challenge, and I think it's very easy. You only have to stop for 2 or 3 years and look up again, and business will say, wow, where did that all come from? But I would throw that back at you and say, tell us, because I'm not running a business, not at the moment. I'm not trying to be an innovator. I'm not trying to find my way through. We'll only know if the framework that we put out there isn't working if you tell us. So please tell us. Never be shy.
That's a fair request. We've got time for one more. Anybody want to, from the floor, want to ask any final? Yeah, Britt.
I don't know, I'm already mic'd up. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this, but I just wonder, do you think that we in Britain shout loud enough about the things that we do in autonomy and in this sector in particular, compared to other nations and perhaps our Scandinavian neighbours?
I think that's probably a fair challenge. I think one of the rocket boosters that the Prime Minister put under Department for International Trade when he came in as Prime Minister was to really try and be much more, he used to say American about it, less polite, less, quietly getting on with it and more shouting from the rooftops. And DIT have been really, really forward-leaning in trying to support business to get out there and to, obviously make exports, but to really highlight what's brilliant about what the UK is doing. Is there more we can do? Probably. And I think in any of these new sectors, there's always room for more because we're all fighting in a new territory. But I think there is a huge push, and certainly under Liz Truss and her team, to really try and drive forwards all the innovation that the UK is doing and make it world leading. But again, if you don't think we are, tell us.
Minister, if I may, all of us here at DSEI and Shipping Week and all the other things that are going on know on the pressures, particularly at ministerial level. So the fact that you flogged all the way down here in the rain wearing a Royal Navy top cover is hugely appreciated. and the chance for the people on this conference to hear you speak in person, very much valued. And if I may ask you to show your appreciation for that. Right, I'll come with you. The minister's disappearing, but Emma from SMI is going to do a bit of housekeeping before I come back.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for our Pathways to Autonomy, the Road to 2030 and Beyond. I'd just like to quickly say before she's gone, thank you very much to the Minister for joining us today and for rushing to get here, we really appreciate it. I'd just like to say thank you to the Royal Navy first for hosting us today in such a wonderful fashion as always, and it really is great to be back in person, and for me it's the first time I've met a lot of you in person, so it's really great, so thank you all for coming. The maritime autonomy sector is changing at pace across the military and commercial sectors. They're separate but not separable, and the whole marine autonomy environment needs regulation and control to match the pace of equipment development. Opening in spring 2022, we'll see the launch of the new National Centre dedicated to marine autonomy, Seabotics, the National Centre for Operational Excellence in Marine Robotics. This will play a key role in the development, training and assurance of maritime autonomy, contributing to the ecosystem of organisations that ensure the UK maritime sector leads the world in innovation and achieves the goals set out by Maritime 2050. We have a selection of these organisations sponsoring this event today, so please do take the time to speak to them after the panel is finished, if you haven't already. I'd just like to say thank you to the National Oceanography Centre, Seabot XR, SeaKit and Kinetic for sponsoring today, and a special thank you to Lloyd's Register for partnering with us on this event. The Department for International Trade have also helped us greatly in putting this event together, so thanks goes to them too. I would now like to hand back over to James, just in time, who'll be moderating our panel today. James retired from the Royal Navy in 2005 and now chairs the UK Maritime Autonomous Systems Regulatory Working Group, is a member of the UK Maritime Autonomous Systems Steering Group and the SMI MASG Council. He'll introduce you to the panel of speakers we've got today, but there is information in your pack on your chairs. There's some spare ones at the front if anybody doesn't have one. That's enough from me. Thank you everyone for joining us. And now, James, thank you for moderating. Over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Right. So we can get into the meat of this. And firstly, on the top of your sheets on your chairs, you'll see an introduction. It was really to get this thing going, but this is the opportunity to hear from the leading experts in different elements of the business that make it all work, give a few of their own views, discuss various questions that I'll be setting, and then the whole idea, and it's so much better if we get interaction with you guys sitting in the chairs. They're ready for this, and you'll hear how it works as we move along. They're each going to do in turn a brief intro to say who they are, but if I can sort of go down the line, Rear Admiral Peter Sparks, who used to be the operations officer of this one's predecessor, HMS Fearless, when I was the captain of her, is now the chief exec of the UK Hydrographic Office. He'll explain more in a moment. The sharp-eyed here will see that sadly Ruth from MCA is unable to come up today, but thankfully we have one of the policy leads from MCA in the form of Dr. Katrina Kemp, who'll give you a word in a mo. Then you've got Britt, who is the claims and legal director for ship owners, who really have put themselves up in the front of the whole question of insurance. When I started doing the circuit on this nearly 10 years ago, you know, the thing that they always thought would floor us from the team on the floor was, "But you're never going to get insurance." Well, Britt and a number of others are the ones who proved that all wrong. Andy McCarron is from LR, and so very much involved, as you will appreciate, on the class society aspect of all this, not just on autonomy, but also on novel technologies and everything else that's going along. And Doctor, we have an Admiral, 2 doctors, and a Ms. and a Mr. Peter is now an independent, but he became BP's absolute expert in the wake of certain disasters he might choose to talk about, and then led BP through the route towards using autonomous vessels in their work. So I cannot think of a better panel. That's them introduced along by name. I'm going to sit down there. So Peter, if you could just give a couple of secs on who I am, please, and why you're here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Sparks, as James said, formerly his operations officer, just proof that you can serve with James Fanshawe and never, ever truly leave. It's a bit like the Hotel California. I'm just leaving the Royal Navy now after 32 years, surface ship driver, frigates, destroyers, and lastly, the ice patrol ship before becoming the commander of the Portsmouth Flotilla. And then my last uniform job before joining the UKHO was in the Pentagon, working on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I am now the Chief Executive of the UK Hydrographic Office, where I'm able to bring to bear my experience of surveying in the field down in Antarctica. So delighted to talk to you today and to take your questions on autonomy, because we, the UK Hydrographic Office, for those who don't know, are the UK's primary charting authority. We also chart for 71 other nations and work with 125 other countries to ensure a global provision of hydrographic products and services to 9 in 10 of the world's ships that trade internationally. We're an executive trading fund of the Ministry of Defence, turnover about £160 million a year.
Thank you, Peter. Katrina.
Hello, good afternoon. Katrina Kemp. I work for the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, and I have done for a significant number of years. But for the last 3.5 years, I've worked in autonomy, primarily facilitating our regulatory response to the developments in autonomous vessels. My role has also involved sitting at the IMO in the mass working groups, which are enlightening, and it's always good to see the developments at that level as well. So my current role is Maritime Autonomy Policy Lead, but I also work with our Maritime Future Technologies team, who facilitate and support a lot of the projects that most of the people in this room are developing and getting those vessels on the water. And that's my role. Thank you.
Britt.
Hello everyone, I'm Britt Pickering. I'm the Claims and Legal Director of Shipowners P&I Club. Shipowners is one of 13 international group clubs. Together we form the international group, and we insure over 95%, I think, of the world's ocean-going tonnage. We actually specialise in our club in small and specialist vessels. So obviously the autonomous sector, if I can use that word, is very interesting to us. So a number of years ago, I think it might have been 5 years, we drafted the first bespoke autonomous vessel policy for third-party P&I risks. And we have a small but growing book of business. I think at the moment we have about 45 vessels insured with us, which is great. Apart from that, my question to the Minister was really with a different hat on. I'm also a non-exec director of Maritime London, so I had that hat on when I asked that question. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Britt. Andy.
So good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here today. My name is Andy McCarran. I'm the Business Director for the Maritime Performance Services at Lloyd's Register. This is a relatively new business that we pulled together at the beginning of this year, which looks to bring together some of our technical advisory, our business consulting, and also some of our digital solutions to be able to really move towards becoming a trusted advisor for our clients, so really going beyond classification. One of the purposes of obviously being here today is because the team that's here from Lloyd's Register is very, very active in the assurance frameworks that we've put forward with the unmanned marine systems, so the UMS code and also the grey boat code, which is helping some of our clients and partners get certification against assurance and safety assurance of their specific investments, such as CKIT. Background-wise, been with Lloyd's Register about 2 years now. Prior to that, I was with General Electric, so I've been with GE for about 20 years through various incarnations, but always around technology insertion, technology developments, etc., right the way across power generation, aviation, and maritime. So really pleased to be here today.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Peter Collinson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Peter Collinson. I'm sort of here today as an independent advisor. I have a consultancy called Dendritica. And why is that? Why should that be? Well, basically, I've got about 20 years of BP behind me and left last year, actually, to actually forge ahead with maritime autonomy. So in my role in maritime autonomy, probably about the past 7 years, I've been involved in funding R&D and actually building the business case for a large oil major, namely BP, of how we can actually implement autonomy and make it real. So 4 years ago, we hatched the strategy, which was fully 100% subsea inspection from unmanned systems by 2025. We can have a discussion about how real that might be. But effectively, you know, trying to change a large organization with a very, very traditional supply base to take up autonomy and actually stimulate and develop the market to provide products and services that could actually challenge the incumbent systems. So that was 7 years, and then last year I decided it was actually the perfect time. I think autonomy is in a perfect storm of opportunity now. So I decided to spin off and consult companies, governments. And one of the other roles that I have at the moment is actually supporting NERC with the net zero oceanographic capability for the UK scientific fleet and how that can decarbonise. So I'm industry lead for that group. Thank you. Thanks, James.
Well, let's crack into a bit of discussion and debate now. The first thing that always strikes me is that this word autonomous is a strange word. It means so much to some people, so much to others, so much to others. Some use it in a derisory way, some use it to try and describe what they're doing. What I'm interested from the panel is, what does it actually mean for you? And I'm going to ask Andy to kick off on this one, because the class societies are, you know, obviously very deeply embedded in what it means and what it means for them. So Andy, if you could give us a few words on this magic word, autonomous or autonomy.
I think if we asked everybody in the room, we'd had a slightly different version on what autonomy actually means. But from our perspective, autonomy means the navigation of a ship using digital means. And that really allows the ship to, I'm going to say, undertake a voyage using a reduced onboard direct control of that ship. And that can really range from onboard supervision through remote watchkeeping, right the way up to fully remote supervision of autonomous functions, not necessarily full ships. But really to make the benefit of the autonomy, let's say, journey through those stages, is that we have to consider the ship as very much a system of systems approach. It's not just about a black box navigation. It's very much a combination of a number of things, including things like seakeeping, vessel and platform control systems and management, but also around the cargo payload and also the integration with other maritime stakeholders within the industry. So in a nutshell, and to summarize, the basic difference between an autonomous ship and a conventional ship is that an autonomous ship must be able to act in a way that it can protect itself, protect other maritime users, and also the environment with reduced human intervention.
Yes, note the term reduced human intervention. Those of you who are aficionados of all this will know the levels that IMO did and so on, and the UK Code of Practice has inconveniently got another set. Katrina, what about you? Do you want to have a go on autonomy?
I think I agree significantly with what was said there. I think for us, from a regulatory perspective, we separate it between remotely operated and fully autonomous, but we're very aware that there's a huge range within that. And there's also this, perhaps what IMO initially started as degree 1, that is almost a conventional vessel with additional technology, those smart ships. And I think that's the bit that's still a bit grey, if I'm honest, and is sometimes included in that term autonomous vessel and sometimes isn't. But I think, for me, everything Andy's just said reflects our thinking, but it's very much, it's remotely operated. There is still a human in the loop somewhere through to this fully autonomous. And I think there, and I was pleased Andy added this, that actually there's this human supervision. There might not ever be a case where we just let a vessel go off and do what it likes and trust it to do so. possibly just because actually it's quite a wealthy asset. It's a lot of money to sort of just set off and hope it gets to where it's supposed to arrive at. So I think for us, that's where we sit, and that's where we're aiming in terms of regulations as well.
From a user point of view, Peter, do you have a...
Yeah, I take the definitions absolutely. As an operator, I see autonomous opportunity. For the operational tasks that are generally high cost, high risk, or persistent, autonomy satisfies all those requirements at a fraction of the cost, at a significant operational saving, both financially, but also in terms of carbon and in people. And that's where I see the real advantage and opportunity here that we as operators should be seeking to explore fully.
Well, let's pause there and let me throw it open to the audience. Does anybody want to come back with either their own definition or take to task the three who've offered a view? You've got to warm up down there, or we're going to be stuck here for an hour wondering why we're doing it. But please, anybody want to offer a thought on it? Oh, that's a bit disappointing. Well, keep thinking. Yes, hello.
Just a quick question.
Sorry, there's a mic coming your way, please. No, there's a mic coming.
I'd just be interested. Paul James from Lloyd's Register. I'd be interested to know how Brit looks at the risk associated with varying levels of autonomy from an insurance and money point of view. So that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really useful question because, Brit, you're about to give us a view on why insurance is not as bothered as many people thought you would be.
Yes, it's a good question. So the word autonomous or autonomy is really tricky and it's really grey. And when we actually started to think about writing a policy for this sector, it's the word that we got really strung up on, and it caused us some real difficulty. So we rather copped out and piggybacked on the code and the levels of autonomy. But actually, joking aside, it is the analysis of risk that is important to us, and it's those levels of autonomy that that factor into our analysis of that risk. We are getting more comfortable with the risk. I can't say that we are absolutely comfortable, but we are getting, day by day, more comfort as we underwrite more. I have to say that we have a small book of business, and we have had one loss, and that was not causally related to autonomy, which is a very nice thing to be able to say. I've probably totally jinxed it now, and there's probably some vessel out there, as we speak, careering into something. But yeah, it's the levels of autonomy that we're interested in.
Yeah.
But we don't get too strung up about it now. The way we underwrite is really quite hands-on, although they're small vessels and relatively low premium for us and with low limits. But we generally do that in a quite hands-on way, and we learn as much as we can about the individual operator or owner and then underwrite it from there.
Can I take this one stage on? In the early days of your thinking and others, I think we might be able to quantify some of this because what percentage of your claims in manned ships are human-related claims?
Well, it's nice that you asked that, James.
Oh, good. Hey, I asked a good question, team. That's a first. Note the time. Something.
Right, now I did. That's why I've got some papers in front of me. So just for 2020, because I wanted to choose a whole year, we had in our club only, and bear in mind that we are one of 13 mutual insurers, so we had just under 3,000 claims at a total cost of just around about $85 million US. Of those claims, 1,200 or so are crew claims, and they cost us around about 16 million in 1 year. So you can see that the sector of the crew, the human sector, is massive. It's a really big deal. And it's all very well bandying around numbers and figures and dollars, but each of those 1,200 odd claims represents a crew member who is ill, who is injured, who possibly has died. And it's very difficult to quantify that human element, that human suffering. There's also another side to crew claims. Quite often, a collision or an oil pollution or whatever it is, a grounding, has a human factor in it, a human element, either causing the loss or saving the vessel from a loss. So it's a emotive subject. But in terms of actual money and actual numbers, it's really large. I think it's about 30% of our claims are crew.
I mean, humans get blamed for a lot. I mean, the IMO figures, well quoted, 80, 85%, whatever it is. I always get a bit nervous about this because sometimes it's a machine that doesn't quite right, and whether a human manages to sort it out quick enough to avoid a collision or a grounding or whatever. Let's not get too stuck on that. Peter, do you want to throw your towel in the ring on autonomy here?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think from the sort of realpolitik view of being in an operation and an organisation that actually is looking at how we take this on, for me, autonomy is a very much a double-edged sword, levelled with both risk, threat, and opportunity. I think really, when you mention autonomy, I think most people in operations jump straight to the concept of threat-based. A lack of control. The machine is going to take over my job, it's going to take over the processes, and it's going to go wrong. And actually, I think that's where the discussion around automation, people are quite happy with automation as a concept, that actually get increased efficiency, increased safety, and basically, an increased revenue from it. There's that blending, I think. So the A word, autonomy, I think, can be a real red rag for getting these things embedded with new customers. So this scalability, I think, and the medical sector, I think, has done a brilliant job around autonomy, that we see augmented, the best people and the best skills coupled with the best automated technologies. And we see this in the operating theatre, where basically when you blend those two together, all of a sudden you get a big step change in efficiency and positive outcomes. And I think perhaps as a sector we're not quite there yet. We need to do more to prove that autonomy is a scale, and that actually starting at the thin end of the wedge, where you give up a comfortable amount of control to see that autonomy can actually drive things, I think is perhaps the way to start. So at the moment, I'd say autonomy is more threat-based than opportunity, but I think that can turn around quite quickly with some pretty clear, simple, and repetitive examples.
I'm going to move the debate on a step now, because some people get stuck on, what is autonomy and what does it mean and how do we do it and so on. Of course, one of the key points about this is that, and we've just heard a minister saying it, we're all on the path to zero emissions. Yeah. And of course, what autonomy offers you is the real opportunity to capitalize on reducing the amount of power in a vessel for human usage, the SOLAS restrictions, and so on and so on and so on. So what I'm interested in is what the panel feel from their perspective, how much autonomy is really going to help us towards achieving these targets for zero emissions. And Katrina, I wonder if I could start with you from a regulatory point of view, please.
Of course. So obviously, autonomy is going to be part of that picture. It's not going to be the whole answer. I think most of us in the room are aware that the technology being used in autonomous vessels will potentially help with fuel efficiencies. They're part of a bigger picture in terms of port infrastructure and arrival times. I think the other thing to be aware is that for us as a regulator, and when we support the projects that come to us, they're very rarely just an autonomy project or an emissions reduction project. There are often elements of both of those involved in what's going on, which present challenges for us as well as for them from a technology perspective. So I think it will help, but I don't think it's necessarily the answer. And I think it's part of a much bigger picture that's going on there.
Andy?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I would agree. I think it's part of a bigger picture and part of a bigger jigsaw puzzle. I think what we're pretty clear on is that there's going to be no silver bullet to solving some of the decarbonisation challenges that we have ahead of us. What I would say around autonomy now is that it is starting small, and we're seeing some great progress across things like survey, surveillance, and some of the data mining that we're looking at on understanding more about the ocean economy, which is only going to enrich our thinking around other technologies or solutions that will come in for some of the the ocean-going cargo transportation that will have different challenges. So I do think we're making some headroom in that, and obviously these vessels being smaller use less energy, so naturally they are actually environmentally preference to some of their larger ships by actually undertaking some of the mundane tasks that need to be undertaken. I think as we scale that up to 2030 and we look at where we'll potentially be, we will see autonomous ships as some of the first ones that will use some of the low carbon fuels. Again, because of the cheaper infrastructure to drive some of these. But I think that really is around the waterborne trade. So that'll be around coastal routes, and it'll be around distribution within port warehouses into localized distribution to consumers, as opposed to necessarily around ocean-going cargo ships.
Well, you've just thrown the stone in the pond about hydrogen and all the other low fuels. Do we have anybody from that sector who's into the fuel side of this who'd like to offer a comment, or more generally, anybody got views on this? Because without a shadow of a doubt, future fuels and the technologies that go with it are a key subject. And lots of people, Andy and I came from a conference further upriver where this was being very widely discussed. And it's all very well, we know that hydrogen technology and well-to-wake and all that stuff is out there, but the question is it out there in ports where these ships are going to go, and how are we going to achieve the infrastructural change and so on and so on? It's so intricately sort of balanced. Does anybody want to comment on that from the floor before I pass it on to an oil and gas man who should know this like the back of his hand? Yeah, sorry, if I can, there's a hand behind you, Alan, if I may. Sorry, I couldn't see who it was. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Tim Kent, Lloyd's Register. So perhaps I won't stray into the alternative fuels completely, but maybe stick with the link between some of the decarbonisation measures and the potential offered by autonomy. We consider the complex engineering challenges of deploying some fuel systems on board that will help us towards the decarbonisation targets. This is introducing additional complexity, additional challenge for what is reasonably possible to expect of an average crew, shall we say. And so part of the solution for accommodating those systems safely on board is increased automation. That may be autonomy. So there's a clear link there. It's not a case of autonomy driving some of the decarbonisation measures, but it's a case of autonomy enabling the safe deployment of some of the complex engineering that's still to be innovated, and enabling that to be deployed in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody want to offer an alternative view? I'll come to you, Peter, in a moment. Yeah, please, in the front here, if I could.
Hi, Matt Hunt from Thales. We've been looking at next generation USVs and looking at reconstituted.
Can we turn the volume up, please?
Reconstituted carbon fibres, different propulsion methods, reusable, grindable carbon, so that you can recycle platforms post use. We've been looking at electric propulsion, hydrogen fuel cells. Now, when we've proposed that to the customer base, it's all too much, too new, too soon. So we haven't quite overcome the autonomy problem. Please don't come to us with battery density technology, hydrogen fuel cells, novel propulsors. So how does the panel see the introduction of something that's already new with more new technology on top?
Great. Well, Peter, do you want to have a go at that?
Thanks. I was just going to say that one of the things that we've started to do through our supply chain is to encourage our surveyors to be net zero in the conduct of the surveys that they do for us. And so that is promoting more and more of the survey companies to use autonomous vessels, which, as we all know, use a fraction of the carbon that a crewed platform would. And we've seen real benefits out of that. The last 3 major surveys we've undertaken have all been net zero, and that's part of our proposal. And that's very much to Andy's point. Surveying allows you to do that, low carbon, persistent, low speed operations at range in smaller vessels. And I applaud it. We are very much trying, as stewards of the maritime environment and being perceived to be stewards of the maritime environment, to be leading on this. But we would be interested to understand what you're doing on that.
Peter?
I think what's interesting about this is that, 3 or 4 years ago, I funded a demonstration and, well, several demonstrations, but, we can see what autonomy does. We can get 99.98% reduction of carbon intensity from things like subsea inspection using autonomous systems with an equivalent, if not better, data quality. It's actually really hard to argue why we shouldn't be changing the business model for these systems. The argument that is often used is that basically it just has a singular purpose. So I think there's something around, and I keep on using this term a lot, but actually the Swiss Army knife of the sea. If you can actually blend autonomy to actually do more than one thing very well, then you've got an unbeatable solution. I think also, coming back to the zero carbon and the appetite for zero carbon, there has been a massive shift in the past 2 years. I think most corporations now, are preaching a pledge to net zero. And actually one of the easiest first hits you can get is around the Scope 1 emissions, which are the emissions from how you operate. This is where autonomy comes in. So irrespective of whether autonomy switches to battery, hydrogen, it's already delivering 99% plus a reduction of carbon, which is pretty good, but that's not 100%. And I think that extra 0.002% is actually something that needs to be focused on. What's good is that I think the market and the customer base will want that 0.2% probably faster than we can deliver it. And I think that's part of the excitement and I think the change that's coming.
Britt?
As insurers, I'd just like to say that sustainability is a really big deal, and I think it goes hand in hand with this sector. Does it put us off in terms of writing that risk? No, absolutely not. We actually really want to encourage that, and we're a mutual, so any of our members who would change their fuel type and become more sustainable, more green, would be very favourably looked on by us. It's definitely something that we want to encourage. I was also going to say as well, I think that the whole sustainability and autonomy, it's so wrapped up together. We're very interested at the moment in wind farms, and we insure lots of vessels servicing wind farms and operating there. And many of our offshore, our autonomous vessels are in that sector. And again, it's just a complete marry-up of sustainability.
Katrina, do you...
I was just going to add to the point that from our perspective, we have a Maritime Future Technologies team that, yes, starts looking at autonomy and emission reductions, but it's also about novel technologies. So it covers all of those new ideas. And yeah, they might be a little bit too much for companies to sort of get their head round, but that's the whole purpose of this team in the first place, is to look broadly at novel technologies, those that we don't normally deal with in other parts of the agency as part of our day-to-day business. So I think from our perspective, we're sort of open arms to those new ideas. We might not have the answers, but we're willing to work with people to try and give them the confidence to sort of explore in these areas.
There was a question, I saw a hand, I can see yours on.
Thank you.
Please.
I'm Mark Turner, I'm from the Department for Business. I wanted to ask a question that's based around, we've seen a lot of demonstrators, the word piloting, new innovations and early applications starting to happen. So the Prime Minister has now announced there's going to be a flagship vessel which he hopes to see in the water by 2024-25. So my question is, how would the panel and this audience want to use that platform to demonstrate these technologies as part of that flagship opportunity? And what technologies do you think will be ready to go into that vessel when it embarks?
Okay. Andy, do you have a view on that from a class society point of view?
I'd probably answer it around more demonstration and technology of different technologies.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to the question I think that was asked down here. There's a lot of technology providers here in the UK and globally that want to look at de-risking of some of their solutions. And I think the trick for me is to bring those as system of systems tests so that they become more and more meaningful. And I think some of the ways, and I was going to come back to the SQEP challenges that we have in this country around some of these new systems. You know, we talk about AI and machine learning, that we're banding it around as though this thing that everybody understands. We don't. You know, and there's also around just the basics of electrification. That's still relatively new to naval and maritime, or defence and maritime worlds, and that sort of qualified experience is really got to be improved in the country around the training and the infrastructure that's going to go in place to support this once we look to scale it. So I think my recommendation would be more trials and testing, helping us as well as a class society to be candid around, you know, maturing the assurance framework, so that we can provide confidence to other stakeholders that use the outputs of the work that we do around that assurance framework to be able to provide the services that they provide as well.
Britt.
It's a great question, by the way, because it's a real food for thought around how do we spend this wisely. Sorry, Britt.
That's all right.
Yep.
I think it is a very good question. My question to the Minister was earlier, does she think that we are, as a country, shouting loud enough compared to our neighbours, perhaps? And I think that my view is that we're not. And I think that I would like to see this initiative as more of a shout out for Britain and the technology that we have here, and the innovation that's going on here. So I agree with you, Andy. More trials, more visible stuff going on. I think that would be amazing, and an amazing use of that vehicle.
If I can go personal for a minute, we heard last night, those of us who were here, the Minister of Defence talking about, I think, 19 bids for this national flagship. And I mean, I draw comfort in that because it shows that there's a bit of a head of steam in it, and we know that it's got the Prime Minister's attention. My personal reflection is that I was the navigator of a certain ship called Britannia in 1976 when we did the very first Industry Day in New York as part of the Independence 200s. And we entertained 100 Mr. Biggs from America on board. I won't tell you what they drank at lunchtime, but after it, there was invisible export signings of 100 million. 1976. The thing about ships is, and this is why so many of us spent our life in the maritime world, they are an extraordinary magnet for people to come and have a look at, come on board. And people who wouldn't normally just go to a conference center or a meeting or whatever are drawn to ships. And that's why personally, I and many of us ex-yachties, as we used to call ourselves, are excited about this, because wherever you go in the world, a ship draws attention to the UK.
Yeah.
That thing, the white ensign at the back, and I hope it will have one, it's a huge magnet. So anyway, end of reflections on ill-spent youth. I saw a hand, sorry if I may, okay, yeah, please, Wayne.
Hello.
Oh,
Bill
okay.
Biggs, Kinetic. I've got the microphone now.
Yeah, you've got it, Bill, you're the king.
I suppose that the last point brings out perhaps a tendency when we talk about this technology. We like to think about low carbon and autonomy together, and we convolve it on a single platform. And you know, it's seductive, and we kind of these futuristic pictures of large platforms. But I think the two pieces brought it out. Actually, some of the opportunity comes in completely recutting how we do things, perhaps using smaller platforms that are going to give us benefits in terms of carbon and the intelligence at the platform level, perhaps using a number of systems collaborating, is where the smart spark comes from. And I think we run a danger when we start thinking about this as just being something, a focus for large platforms. You know, when we talk about autonomy, any kind of graduated scale always takes about context and mission complexity. I think if you're using smaller platforms, you're inherently generating less risk. And I think it's just need to be careful, I think, about putting the two together and not thinking about the opportunity that comes from using the technology differently.
Let's just pause there. I saw a big nod from Andy.
I certainly heard the first part of it. I did actually tail off towards the end, so I apologise if I've missed the end of it. But I think you were saying that smaller is better, and it's not all about necessarily very large-scale applications from the offset. Okay, so I think we would all fully agree, and we were actually having that conversation before the actual panel kicked off, around this is not about necessarily even full autonomous ships. It's around automated processes or autonomous processes or functions within a supply chain. Yeah. And I think it's also one of the things that we're going to come on to possibly later around the conversation is how do you invest in this as well and bring in new financing? And that is really that you've got to rip up the rule book and say it's not about an asset as a ship anymore. It's very much that ship providing a purpose, which I think was what Peter was talking about. And you look at outcome-based functionality that we're trying to drive rather than tech and shipping. It's more of an enabler to provide the outcome of low-cost cargo transportation with zero emissions. And then we can build up from there around whether it's solutions, platforms, networks, or just technology solutions that will help really around some of those dull, dirty, or dangerous processes that can't be done more cost effectively with a human being.
Peter?
Andy, you've just captured it well with the dull, dirty, and dangerous for me.
I'd made notes earlier, so I'd take it from you.
No, Bill, I completely agree. We've got to think beyond the platform. I mean, we're on a landing platform dock at the moment. But for me, it is about appropriate capabilities to achieve the outcomes that you need to undertake the operational or commercial function that you need to. And that's the real opportunity for me with autonomous vessels. What concerns me is people being bold enough to disinvest to reinvest. And certainly in the Navy at the moment, that is one of the challenges that the Navy is trying to overcome. There's enormous emotion attached to the totemic capability that's inherent in a ship. It's very difficult to translate that into a network of smaller autonomous vessels that might or might not be crewed. That is both presentationally but also operationally challenging as well. And so that's the real issue for me, is trying to understand how you can swing to the next vine, as one advocate suggests, to be able to divest yourself of the past and take the future and realize the opportunities inherent in autonomous and uncrewed solutions.
Just before we move on and look at money in slightly more detail, I know I've got two questions there. Wayne?
Hello, Wayne Ross, Rolls-Royce Automation Solutions. My observation is that large-scale adoption is usually driven by legislation. If we look in the past to scrubbers in major companies such as Maersk, the spaces for scrubbers have been left in those vessels for up to 10 or 15 years, similar with ballast water. How do we think we're going to achieve the targets that have been set with the legislation coming along to support it?
Alan, can you ask your question at the same time? I hope it's vaguely related.
Yes, it is. I'm shifting hats, so I'll put my Institute of Marine Engineers hat on.
Okay.
And it's really the discussion. The carbon gain is, as Admiral Sparks and a number of speakers and members of the audience have said, is coming from doing more with less. You know, I bought some smaller hydrographic vessels when I was head of engineering at the Port of London Authority, and we were able to do the same level of surveying with a little 7-metre boat that previously we were doing with a 25-metre boat. And it's that sort of thing. So I've seen it in action, and the next thing will be to do it with smaller platforms with no one on board. And in the same way as Wayne's point, you know, so for certain roles, that is going to be possible. but shifting very large quantities of stuff around the world, and we are an island nation, which quite a lot of people of the public and indeed our dear politicians seem to forget. Shifting huge quantities of stuff, or indeed people who want to go on cruises, they do, in an autonomous environment. I mean, you know, the idea of the ladies who have to sit at the captain's table being faced with a monitor with someone at the other end, you know, 12-year-old with his PlayStation, you know, that there are certain areas where the problem of, or the issue of liquid fuels having such a high energy density to be able to get you from all the way around the world in you know, and back again in one shipful is not going to happen with lithium-ion batteries or whatever. What'll be the challenge for those ships is finding alternative fuels for which there is an achievable and ready logistics support.
Absolutely.
Because we're still going to have to shift large quantities of stuff and all the people who want to go on cruises around.
Okay.
Spot on, I think, first. Well, do you mind? Sorry, Peter.
No,
right, I was going to say. But spot on, and I think one of the things we did was actually break it down, because I think there's a lot of anecdotal noise around a lot of this sort of thing as well, that somebody will take you deliberately down another rabbit hole because they haven't answered another question. So what we tried to do in LR was break this down into what we called marine solutions readiness levels, and really have that as technology readiness levels, investment readiness levels, and community readiness levels, and break it down into genuine, you know, 0 to 9 type ratings against each of those for each different type of fuel that we're looking at, so that we can look at some of the challenges. And to your point, the technology is not the problem. The infrastructure will be the problem. We talk about LNG as you know, for example, a mature fuel. It still doesn't have a global supply chain in place. So, you know, now when we talk about hydrogen, we talk about ammonia, we potentially talk about reactors, fuel cells, you know, as opposed to just two-strokes. And it's a really interesting question around, it will be the investment readiness levels that need to go in now to ensure that we're enabled for some of that, let's say, evolution to revolution that we need to go through for decarbonisation. And it's the same for autonomy. So if we look at coastal routes and we look at port hubs that are going to be needed in terms of revolutionising the Thames, those are sorts of things, as we know, Peter, I think, having spoken about it today, need to be done sooner rather than later, because that's the infrastructure that needs to go into place to be able to support the technology deployments that are making some really good leaps and bounds, because they're cool. Infrastructure is not cool, and it's one of those things that we've really got to get our heads around, is to those sorts of investments that need to be made.
Peter, do you want to?
I would just say that autonomous vessels are obviously a tremendous opportunity for the maritime sector going forward, but they're not a panacea. And let's not kid ourselves. The likelihood of having cruise ships that are autonomous is pretty remote. And larger vessels might not have a need for autonomy, but those vessels that do, or those tasks that do, offer real potential. And I think that's where we've got to exploit it. That's where we've got to realise the operational gains, and whether that's carbon neutrality, whether that's operational savings, or managing operational and commercial risk. That's where we can really make a difference in the short term. But the idea that autonomy will satisfy every ship in the world and we'll never have a seafarer again is probably not there yet.
Otherwise known as barking bonkers. I mean, it is sometimes forgotten in this discussion debate that one is not trying to foist all this on every vessel that floats up and down whatever bit of water you want to talk about. It's got to be seen in its proper context. The last few questions have thrown up so many buzzwords and keywords that I want to explore a bit more. You know, humans, well, we'll do that in a minute. And what does all this mean for people and jobs and security and the maritime trade and so on? That's one. Culture. I think, you know, there is a real point here about how far the culture has changed. I think sometimes people don't realize quite how far this has moved. Those of us who've been in the sort of debating forum for more than a couple of weeks know that it is a completely different ballpark that we're sitting in now. But culture is a huge thing. I did a meeting the other day, and I got the old stock trades. Well, nobody will ever insure them. Well, Brit has put your mind at rest on that. But that is still, unfortunately, a sort of gut reaction and a response to people who feel threatened by this. And I'm sorry to use a tricky word, but there are people who think that those involved in autonomy are trying to take away jobs and make things more difficult. Absolutely, as I think this panel is proving, that isn't the case. Firstly, we want better safety. Secondly, we want increased, if not enhanced, job security. But we want actually to do all this for a reason. So one of the interesting points is, how do we get the right level of investment for this? A lot of talk on the subject at the moment. Again, the earlier conference that I came up here from, this got quite a bit of airtime because, not surprisingly, people are a bit nervous about investing in the early movers and the what happens if it all goes wrong and so on and so on and so on. So I'd be quite interested to ask, if I may, Peter, from your point of view, how do you see investment? How much of this is actually achievable, and how much of it is sort of aspirational and fighting talk?
So I think probably 2 years ago we would have had a very different discussion, and I think the carbon budget, the climate emergency, the societal pressure that I'm seeing, that we're all seeing, is actually driving, I think, going to drive fundamental changes. If you look at the financing now is all going towards net zero. 1 in 5 major corporations have now got a net zero pledge in place. Coming back to what I was saying before, you make a pledge, you've actually got to honour that pledge with action. Scope 1 emissions, cutting down on the fuel you burn, reducing the carbon to produce your product is the first most obvious sign that you can get. And quite frankly, I can't think of a more exciting and visual replacement and advancement than an autonomous system floating on the water. So I think the investment is coming. You look at green bonds, and I think that the Dutch actually launched a green bond, the Dutch government. It was oversubscribed. It was an $8 billion fund, oversubscribed 7 times, because people can see that the next big growth, the Green New Deal that's been talked about in the US is now starting to hit the road. And I actually think autonomy and net zero, these are meshed. 5 years ago it was all about autonomy. Now it's all about net zero. Actually, they are totally synergistic. And I think the money, financially, I think will come. The other point around what's going to drive it is, I think, about carbon tax. And certainly for oil and gas, the clever operators now are really saying, if we want to actually survive as an organisation, want to survive as a sector, we need to produce the greenest, lowest carbon barrel of oil around. This is a lunge to electrification. This is a lunge to net zero operations. I think it just makes sense. The next stage, and there's lots of discussion in the scientific realm about this, is around the cost of carbon per data point. How much carbon intensity goes into a megabyte of data? And we will see in the future, like when we used to burn oil to run cars on the roads, that actually to burn carbon to produce megabytes of data, is that data single use, is it multi-use? We're going to see an entirely different way of how we use data and how we gather data. And again, I think this feeds into the whole autonomy structure. The one for many, the multiple clients, not owning assets. This is all allergic to data as a service. And I think, for things like data collection, intervention, this is how the future will operate. Peter, with your business, JEBCO 2030 is amazing. These are global ways to map our oceans in ways that we never knew. I think back to the dark old days of Deepwater Horizon, when the only thing that we had to look at the oil coming out of the wellhead was a single gauge. A multi-billion-dollar asset with a single gauge. The future, people will not believe that this was the case. We'll have sensors on everything, as we know. And in fact, one of the biggest threats, I think, to embedding autonomy, coming off financing, is actually this data tsunami and how we effectively deal with the data in a credible, value-focused way, rather than more data being more of everything. more is less, I think, in this world of autonomy. Anyway, I'm veering massively off the subject here.
Well, you're not, unfortunately, because they're all related.
Yeah.
And I'll park data, and
Thank you.
having wasted many hours on trying to value data, we might return to the theme. But Britt,
I'm just going to talk about data.
go.
I love evidence because I'm a lawyer. Okay, so it's just the really pivotal thing for me. We have to have evidence. Something goes wrong, where's the evidence? That's the first thing I think about. And I particularly love the idea of having the vessels in this sector able to provide real-time evidence, real-time data. And that's brilliant, because that will actually kill lawsuits and all that kind of costly litigation. So that's brilliant. But the downside is, how do you deal with all that data? How are we actually going to harness that so that it's meaningful for us? At the moment we have, 30, 40, 50, whatever autonomous vessels. That's not that many. But our club, we have over 33,000 vessels. I mean, I kind of like picture myself in however many years when all of those are in this sector. I hope that we are going to be in a position to be able to deal with that data, because it could literally swamp us. So I think there's a little bit of investment in the services sector as well, in actually looking to the future, having a vision and working out what are we going to do, how are we going to deal with it.
Well, let's switch to someone whose whole business is data, and that is the Hydrographic Office. What's your view, Peter?
Britt, I agree. You talk about 33,000 ships. For me, a ship, a platform, is always a sensor. And we can derive so much environmental information from those platforms and harness it. My Chief Technology Officer would be the first to say, though, don't forget how much cloud technology and artificial intelligence consumes in terms of carbon. And that is something that we must absolutely reconcile going forward. But, as Peter said, JEBCO 2030 is an initiative. We've got to be in that really offers us a global picture. If we can harness and fuse that data in a way that is readily assimilable, we will be able to optimize voyages, we will be able to improve the performance of ships, we'll be able to develop better models for wave height, sea swell, ocean currents and so on, and we can help to mitigate the effects of carbon in different ways. British Cycling did phenomenally well through the Brailsford Inches, just making incremental improvements. There's big steps we can take, but there's also some really smart, small steps, and the compound effect of those, realising the benefits of the data, could be quite significant.
Trina?
If I'm honest, I don't think I actually have anything to add to what's been said. I think the data question, from a regulator's perspective, presents challenges, perhaps more from an international perspective, in terms of challenges there with sharing data and how that information is used. And I think the other point that's already been raised is the infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we're not just talking about the solid port that you're arriving at. You're talking about those communication infrastructures that are going to be passing all this data between each other, between a vessel and its operation centres and wherever else. So I think these guys have said it perfectly, but there are also these regulatory questions that we haven't got our teeth into yet, but we need to get our head round if this is going to go forward.
Thank you. Let me go back to the audience. Yes, hello.
Hi, it's Wendy from Seakit. So there's been different points about small challenges and bigger challenges that need to be faced to kind of progress in autonomy. As companies are kind of pioneering in this, as things are evolving, I'd just be interested to know which challenge each person would kind of tackle first, considering you're all from different areas.
Okay. Well, Peter, you go first then.
So I think it's regulation. I think that we have a lot to learn from the aviation sector.
Yeah.
who have made many more mistakes than we could ever possibly do in the development of unmanned air systems. We have been flying unmanned and autonomous systems over hostile airspace for quite some time, but when you brought it into a regulatory environment, that was quite a different concept, different proposition. And I know that Kinetic and DSTL have done a great deal of work trying to understand that regulatory environment and the space in which we can bring autonomous and crewed vessels. And I think that's the thing that we in the UK could really do well and quickly to the benefit of the international community. And if we did so, if we took a lead on that, then we might start to be able to determine the pace by which others can go.
So,
I guess that leads nicely to me.
Katrina.
I'd agree. I think, based on one of the earlier questions about 2030, I think actually these next 10 years are pivotal for us in terms of regulation. I think domestically, there are areas that we are able to update our regulations. Some of you in the room will know about the workboat code updates. But the only reason we can make those updates is because industry is out there exploring and testing. Because there's no point us making a regulation on something that hasn't happened because we're just putting our finger in the air and we could be going in the wrong direction. So we need the evidence and examples from the trials so we can learn together. Sounds a bit cheesy, but that's what we're doing. So we can then update those regulations. And from my perspective, in sitting in the UK, but also sitting at the IMO, we can then take all of those examples and that experience to the IMO to actually start driving the direction there and supporting the work that they are trying to do, which is pretty colossal, if we're honest, trying to introduce and amend conventions in the space of 5 to 10 years, which is very fast at the international level. So it's doable. I'd like to think we're getting there very slowly, but we're doing our best. And we've got more resource to support that. And I think that, for me, is the key part of this. And I'd agree, it's getting that framework. But it's also having some patience with us because we have our hands tied as to how quickly we can move these things forward. We can have all the research, we can have the answers, but if the opportunity to put that legislation in place doesn't arise, we can't do it.
I think one of the issues, and I'd be interested in your view on this, is that we really don't know which way IMO is going to blow on this now. I mean, people forget that IMO is a club of 174 nations and a lot of onlookers who all have different views on life, and it takes a heck of a long time to get one nation, never mind 174, to pull in the same direction. And Henrik Tunfors, who's the chair of the Scoping Exercise Committee that's been running this thing so far, he's unclear about which way IMO will choose to go. And one of the ways that, we don't need to go into the detail, could make it a bit faster. Another way could make it quite a lot slower. And, the key question really is, we've got the instruments, and we all know them, the COLREGs and SDCW, blah, blah, blah. But, are we going to see a code coming out of IMO? If I put my pennyworth on the table here, I really hope that there's still scope for the main instruments to stay intact, because one of the things that I believe in with some fervor is that we mustn't consider these autonomous ships as something different, something special. They've got to take their place in the greater order of life at sea. And therefore, they have to abide by the regulations, they have to be designed to do that, and so on and so on. The minute we start making a special category for them, I suggest, is the time when we actually make our life more difficult than easier. Andy, you look as if...
No, I think you were summarising it perfectly there. I think, I'm going to bring it down to our level. I think our problem is assurance. It is as simple as that, because of the new technologies that are coming through. And there's some great ideas, especially, some of the ones that you're working with. And I think some of the use cases are developing, but it is about how can we get an assurance framework to meet a regulatory framework when it comes into place, to be able to provide, or realise the benefits of some of those solutions that are being brought to the market. I think where we are lucky in maritime is that we do work across a multi-stakeholder regulatory environment and are very used to that. But what I would say, and I think it's a response to the question, we cannot keep doing what we do today if we expect a different result. And I think if we're going to try and change the industry to be more agile, it is actually about, and it was similar to the last debate we had, James, was how do we get the stakeholders together in a room to actually sort of say, how do we move forward together, rather than take a challenge away and silo the response that comes back and then disrupts the collective that was left and creates more lethargy or more sort of, slower pace into some of these things. So I think it is that redefining each stakeholder's role within the role of maturing autonomy or, taking us into the next generation.
Can I add one thought, and it picks up on something Peter said earlier? I don't think we've been very good in the maritime world listening to the other modes of transport.
Yep.
The air,
Yep.
the road, the rail. Everyone's moving at a different speed on this. You hear stories, but are we actually saying, well, that is applicable to maritime, or
Yep.
should be, or could be applicable, and what are we going to do about it? And Peter talked about the aviation world and the dreaded D word, the drones, and so on and so on. But I think I would like to leave a thought from this conference that we've really got to work in a multimodal way.
Yep.
And learn from what others are doing. And I would stress they've got to learn from some of the things that we've been doing. So, Peter, down the end there, do you have a thought on this one?
Yeah, I think it's around the customer base. And we're perhaps still looking at quite a rarefied customer. Think about the blue economy and its expansion, as was mentioned at the beginning of the conference. There will be new users, there will be new players coming into the maritime that we don't even know yet, with new user cases that we can apply. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that. Again, the concept around it, at the end of the day, it's about molecules being shifted and data being generated, taking a much more agnostic view. So the merging of maritime with aviation, for example, these are just natural fits. If you look at it from a data, gathering data perspective, for example. Perhaps sometimes we're a little bit siloed, and I think that's the technology, and I would say the way that business and society is changing is going to challenge that approach. And we have to go multimodal, I think the term is.
Thanks. Yeah. Peter, quick one.
I think the other thing we need to think about as human beings is the data that's presented to us currently is for our assimilation. It's in a human readable format. And we need to start thinking about developing data that's machine readable. As a hydrographic office, we dumb down the information we acquire from surveys, distilling millions and millions of data points to, a fraction of what they are to provide a human interpretable format. Machines need machine readable information at very high fidelity. And that's another thing that we're going to have to think about. How can we acquire that? How can we build that framework, that context within which autonomous vessels can operate?
Okay. A lot in the panel's thoughts there. Does anybody want to come back on any of it? Oh, hands flying up. Yeah. Can I have a microphone? The furthest forward, please.
Thank you. Steve Brunton, Non-Executive Director at Seabot. We've had questions from colleagues on the other side about regulation. You've commented about regulation. Andy, you talked about infrastructure investment in the future. The Minister talked about the Thales Innovation Centre down at Turnchapel in Plymouth. Emma talked about the Seabotics National Centre at Southampton with the NOC. What does the panel think about how this ecosystem is going to evolve here to support autonomy?
Okay.
It strikes me that we need something like that. Everyone's talking around that, but what does it look like, and who do you think has the pen?
I'll do that in a second. There was another hand, if I could just ask for that question as well, please.
Yeah, thanks. Alistair MacDonald, Purist Marine. Just coming back to the point on money, I think we talked about debt investors and the interest in debt, but of course, by the time you get to debt, you've already got a deal. Okay, you've already got a contract, you've already got a vessel, that's when the debt people get involved. We at Purist Marine, I think, are one of the few, if not the only, equity providers to environmentally focused shipping companies. And I think the challenge we have in this new technology is, who do you go to? We talk about regulation, insurance, class, but you as an individual cannot organize that yourself. There needs to be a single person to go to, and I think I'd just be interested to know who that is.
Okay, let's just pause there. Andy, can I ask you for a thought on both of those questions? They're not far displaced, actually. They're
Yeah, is there a role for a central coordination of an autonomous strategy across the UK that allows the supply chain to understand who they should talk to? That's basically, if I was to sort of bring the two questions together, yes, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, who is going to do it? It's going to be multi-stakeholder. You know, we've got working groups, we've got a number of other things, but not with the mandate to sort of, I'm going to say, bring this alive on a multimodal basis, to look at both technology, readiness levels, you know, operational maturity levels, and then really bringing those into an infrastructure, financing opportunity, you know, et cetera, to look at those opportunities. So yeah, I think that is. Who is it? I'm not convinced I know. Not convinced I know.
Peter, do you have a view on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about, well, I suppose it's merging the two questions, but, you know, my experience working with Innovate UK and BASE has been incredibly game-changing for accelerating this issue and putting the value of these systems in an operational context. So, you know, I mean, one initiative that's going at the moment is the robotics systems innovator, which I believe is, or accelerator, which is actually something that UKRI is focusing on. To almost, it's an anti-grand challenge, I would say, that it's around how do we operationalize and educate the marketplace to start the uptake of these systems. And it's the chicken and egg, you know, you've got to create the demand. And, you know, from my own experience, you put these things in the water, you run a demonstration, you show it's phenomenal. It's difficult to actually get it to live. And it needs that extra bit of impetus around regulation, around financing. They're small tweaks, I believe, but in concert will actually create the change. So I think around accelerators, real practical demonstration in an industrial context with the known and the unknown businesses, and taking punts on SMEs, you know, and smaller players who have more, I'd say, more innovative and risky concepts. So higher risk appetites, money being seeded to educate the end users. And I think that will crystallize in actually creating demand, which should then, I would hope, create the demand for the financing.
Okay.
But I'm an optimist.
Did you want to offer a view, Katrina?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience, in particular from example, the MarLab work, exactly what you've sort of highlighted about trying to figure out how we actually bring all the right people together is also a problem from us from a regulatory perspective. We're very aware that everything we're talking about isn't just maritime. It actually crosses over with working with the UKHO, it crosses over with Met Office, it crosses over with AI, the devolved administrator. There's all sorts, and actually it is, I don't have the answer, but I think it is about that working outside your silos and actually working as a team across government as regulators to look at what we need to do. And it's the same for all the other sectors.
Yep.
And the fact that we're all in the same room, I think we are already starting down that path. We already know that that's what we need. But where there is a one central autonomy, one-stop shop, I don't know yet.
Peter?
I do think government has a convening authority role in this to help bring those stakeholders together. Because it is such a seismic shift in the way in which we operate in the maritime sector. And whilst there might be pump priming activity, whilst there may be startup funding that's required, I agree with Peter and Andy. I think that funding will come, particularly when a business case starts to take into account carbon usage and moving towards net zero. So I think the figures are there. But for me, it is that convening role that we as a country, we as a sector, need to take in bringing everyone together, as Katrina says, in the same space to come up with a framework, to propose a regulatory construct, to understand what the requirements are, and to start to take the narrative forward in the international environment, and to not be on the back foot when others are already out there, the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Japanese and the South Koreans in particular, having seen this week's maritime press.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I don't have an answer either, but the one point that I think really resonates with me, that it must be multi-stakeholder. and not forgetting the service side and the service industries and like insurance, P&I insurance, hull and machinery insurance. It goes together hand in hand with the initial financing. So I think, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think they're two really fantastic questions. Again, I don't have the answer, but I think it's there. It's kind of there in the mix with government and yeah, making sure that all the stakeholders are there around the table.
I think we all said we're not sure, but it's a good idea. So I hope that helps.
Well, can I offer a thought as we begin to close this session out? The fact is that a lot of these, if you like, coordinating functions in the maritime world have been in existence for some years. The question for me is, are people aware of them?
Yeah.
Are people actually using them sensibly? And, you know, for a time, several years ago, and the man in the front here, John Murray, who was the former chief exec of SMI, would, I'm sure if I asked him, but he's retired now, so I won't, would say that SMI, and let's face it, they are a very key part of this very conference, took a really leading role here. There is still an autonomous ship steering group. Yep. There is a MASG council. My own working group on the regulatory side spins out from that via base, and so on. So I'm beginning to think that what we need to do to address the very good questions is to look at what's actually there, and then weave it, knit it all together, and get people talking in a way with targeted subject areas. Yeah. I think what tends to have happened is that the debate has moved on, but the actual groups that are doing this work haven't. Every time I've asked, I've been told, well, there's an intergovernment group between Ministry of Defence and DFT and this, that, and the other. I think if there are members of the government here or the government departments here, I think the message from Pathways to Autonomy is, guys, let's get talking as we did in the early days, but now let's refocus and reconsider what it is we want in output terms.
Yeah.
Not just talking shop terms. What do we need to move this whole debate forward? And it's interesting that Steve, is a very old hand in the MOD side of it, and Alistair, who's in the finance side at Purus Marine, have asked these questions. I'm sure many others will come up with a very similar view. So now we're coming very close to the time where I'm going to draw stumps on this one. I would normally have asked a question of the panelists about their views. What does this all mean for seafarers and people? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do it today because I think most people on board Albion are well aware of the ramifications of this, and in a way that particular question has stopped being asked because people realize that the discussion has taken it on. Yeah. But the role of how do we educate our young people who are still at school, if they're allowed to go there, doing GCSEs and A-levels, universities? Have we got the right mix of courses so that we're ready on the tech side and also the other side, the system side, and all the other bits of it? And this, takes up a lot of debate in some of these central coordinating meetings, and rightly so. But please, I hope there is a theme that has run through today, which is that people are as valuable as they've ever been in the game of having maritime, whatever it is. Doesn't matter what type of ships. I mean, I'm looking behind me at the members of the Royal Marines, who are the Assault Squadron Royal Marine members of HMS Albion. 4 ASRAM, they're called. And they used to be, 4 ASRAM used to be my ASRAM in Fearless when Peter was the ops, and we used to worry about them. Ask yourself this question. Why would you, as you go down and out, to get back to the now rebranded Uber boat, have a look at the vehicles, the green things on the deck that you'll go past. Those guys, and they're standing behind you, some of them, are people who put their lives in harm's way because they're the first to go to a potentially enemy beach and do beach reconnaissance. That's the exam question. Why on earth would you put humans out there if that role can be done by a vessel without humans on board. That's why amphibious has been central to the whole discussion about autonomy in defence. Doesn't mean to say the guys in the Royal Marines are any less valuable. It's just what they do, what they have to do it with, and how they achieve it. That's the key question. We've had reference to JEBCO, and those of you who are in the know, you know, the reality is that because we can't send manned survey boats out forever and a day, we know so little about our ocean, and just think, you know, I mean, nobody in this room needs to be convinced about what that actually means. So it's been a really useful chance to get some views from an expert panel of people, and also some from you. I'm sure there will be more that I hope we've provoked some useful comment. There are topics that we were looking at covering which we haven't got to, which is great, but you know who we are, we know, you know how to get in touch, and all I would ask at the end of this conference is that you take away what is of interest to you individually, but if we can make this a corporate thing and say we all have a stake in making this work in whatever way it will end up. If we were here in 10 years' time, how will we look back now at 2021 other than sort of the COVID experience and a wet boat ride out here, but slightly less wet on the way home. So listen, a few thank yous from me to SMI, Emma Johnson, who's somewhere in the back there. Thank you for a lot of hard work pulling all this together. And to Lloyd's Register, Andy up here, but a whole team of people, Nicola Good and some who are here today and some who aren't. These things don't just happen. And to the sponsors, you saw them listed, but I saw Kinetic, I saw Seakit, and I saw one or two others, and I can't remember who they were. Emma, can you help me out? Can we put the slide back up of our sponsors? Thank you. There they are. Seabot, yes. Hello, Seabot. And NOC, dear old National Oceanography Centre, I should say. These things don't happen unless people put their hands in their pockets. So to the sponsors and the partners, from me as the moderator, a very, very big thank you. And can I personally, on your behalf, say thank you to Albion. Flogging up here over a weekend and setting yourselves up. If you ask the average Matlow in Albion, you know, what do you think about LSIW? They'd probably say bloody hard work. And a rubbish run ashore because they weren't allowed to go into London. But seriously, to the Albion team, I'm not sure if the captain's still up here with us, but to you all, thank you for your efforts. It makes such a difference to see the Navy and the Marines in action, and thank you for being so welcoming and looking after us so well. So, round of applause to Albion. And really, finally, you've heard some fabulous thoughts and views from our panel, from Peter, from Katrina, from Britt, from Andy, from the other Peter. I'm sure you'd like to join me in saying thank you very much indeed. It's been a massively useful session. Thank you. What? All right, go ahead.
I'd just like to say a massive thank you to James Fancher as well for chairing today. I think you'd agree it was a fantastic session. Hopefully you've got a lot out of it. I know I have. So thanks again, James, and to the whole panel for joining us today. I think there are some teas and coffees at the back, again, if anybody wants some before they rush on to the next boat home. But thanks again to everyone for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, guys. Well done.